Hi, I'm KL and welcome to my channel, KL Designs. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this really cool 90s cartoon big head effect. I've used the exact same method on t-shirts for NBA legends Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, who played for the Seattle Supersonics. And also later this year, for an undisclosed retailer, I used the exact same method. Lastly, before we go into the design, I just want to say thank you to those who voted on my story. This was the design that you wanted to see. If you're not already, please follow my Instagram, which is at KL Designs. And who knows, you can have a say in the next design we go through. Before we design anything, we need to consider a few things. So design inspiration and design layout. The brief was simple. It was to create a t-shirt for the 2024 Paris Olympics. So I use a website called Grailed and simply search USA Olympics basketball. And what you can see is I kept finding these cartoon big head designs. I liked how they look and I liked the fact that they were on a white or grey background. So now we've got our inspiration. Let's break down a layout. So looking at this example, in green we have the foreground. This is normally the biggest element and it's what your eyes naturally go towards. In blue, we've got the text elements. Not always, but it tends to be smaller than the foreground and it helps to inform the reader and just tell the story of the graphic. And then lastly, in pink, we've got the background or supplementary elements, which just helps to tie in the overall composition. So now we've got our inspiration, we've got a layout we want to use. Let's get our images. So I jumped straight into Google. I typed in the USA 1992 Olympics basketball squad. That tended to be what the cool designs I kept seeing on Grailed were. So an image I did find and I did really like was this one of 5 players and the Olympic rings. And every time I find an image, I like to get the biggest version possible. So we go into advanced image search. And on the drop down for image size, you can select larger images. So this one came up. So I saved this image because I wanted to upscale it further. So I save it to my background, my desktop, sorry. And when you're doing this cartoon method, it's really important to get the biggest and cleanest image possible. So anyway, now it's saved. I opened a free program called Upscale. Simply drag and drop your image. And then just above upscale, you can see the current image dimensions and how big it's going to be after upscaling. So yeah, simply hit upscale. Once it's done the magic, open it up into Photoshop. And what you can see is the image isn't complete. So the blue and red rings, for example, they're cut off. So the first thing we need to do is to extend the image. You can do this in Photoshop using this inbuilt AI. If you press C or use the crop tool, you can just drag the borders of the image to where you want AI to do the magic. Cool. Once you're happy, you just hit return or generate. You don't need to type in a prompt because all we're doing is just expanding the image. Cool. And once AI is finished, it will just spit out 3 variations for you to choose from. If you're not totally convinced, you can just press generate and 3 more will be spat out. What I will say is the image we're looking at now isn't the greatest. Yeah, and the reason being is because what we're looking at is actually the unupscaled version. annoyingly, I brought this one into Photoshop when I was doing this tutorial. So that's why the image generation isn't as good as it probably will be. I mean, further on in the tutorial, I did swap it out for the upscaled version. But yeah, just so you know, that's why it looks a little bit blurry and probably isn't as crisp as it could be. Anyway, once you're happy, press Control, select both images, right click, convert to smart object. And the first thing we're going to do is to remove the background. If you don't see the bar, go into Windows, and then contextual taskbar should be ticked. So yeah, hit remove background. And normally it does a good job. However, in this case, I mean, one, it's an old image, but two, because I'm using the unupscaled version, it hasn't done the best job. But no problem, we'll just do it ourselves. So what I did then was I right-clicked the half circle, and then I just filled in a solid color. Whenever I'm cutting images out, I like to put just a solid color behind the image. Just helps me see what I'm doing. Next, we need to bring back some of the image. So if you press B or use the brush tool, and make sure that the swatch, so the squares on the left-hand side, the white one is showing. And what this will do is, if we're painting in the mask, which I am now, as long as white is in the foreground, it will just bring back some of that image. And then oppositely, if you have black as the foreground, it will remove some of the image. You can toggle this by pressing X. That's what I'm doing here. And for a more precise cut, I like to use the lasso tool. And in this case, I'm using the polygonal lasso tool. I always struggle to say that. Polygonal. But anyway, now that tool's selected, we can just make precise cuts. I don't always use it. I tend to use this tool for, I guess, like proper objects like buildings or legs in this occasion because they're nice and straight. But because it's polygonal, it just gives harsh straight lines. Anyway, once you want to complete the cuts, if you double click, it will just go back to the beginning. Then press Shift F5. This will fill in the color, and you want to fill in the color with black. Then just hit return or press OK. Cool. I'm just going to go through this now, so feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Whilst we're watching this, just a bit of housekeeping. This was obviously for a t-shirt contest. I'm not selling this design, and if you were to do this and sell it, it would be illegal. Obviously, I don't have the permission from any of these 5 players. So yeah, if you're ever in doubt, just look up on Google or ChatGPT. And now I'm just going to finish off by using the hard round brush. And you can see there, you can increase or decrease the size using the slider, but I like to use the shortcut. And the shortcut is the squared brackets. So the left square bracket will increase the size, and then the right square bracket will decrease it. And you can see throughout, I'm just switching between the different sizes, and I would recommend getting used to these shortcuts. it will just save you bags of time in the future. So once you're happy with your cuts, you've got all of the image separate from the background, open it in a new document. The document I'm using, you can follow along. So you go into new, and then the dimensions I tend to use are 16 by 20 inches. It's a good dimension size for t-shirts. So as long as you're in this size range, anything a few inches below is fine. I have a resolution of 300 dpi. This is perfect for print. Next, we're just going to tidy up the image. So if you go to filter, camera raw filter, and like I said, when we're doing the cartoon effect, we need the base image to be as clean and as big as possible. I don't tend to do this camera raw filter step, but because it's an older image, it isn't the cleanest. But anyway, let's reduce the texture a little bit, bump up the clarity, and then just finish off by sharpening the image and reducing the noise. You can see, looking at the arm definition, so it's a lot more glossier and waxier, and this only adds to the effect that we want to achieve. The only thing is it does leave it a bit darker. So if we right click on the semicircle, click on brightness contrast, tick use legacy, and just bump up the brightness a bit. If we go all the way, you can see it just blows it out. Now all I'm doing now is just clipping the brightness and contrast mask to the image. So you just press Alt and then drag down. So now we've got the 5 players in the background. I just want to get one more player in the foreground as well. So I wasn't too bothered about who it was. I mean, I will say I don't watch or know basketball. But this was right at the end, so I wanted to have somebody I didn't use already. So I chose Jason Tatum. And I wanted to get a plain white t-shirt, but I couldn't find him wearing a plain white one. This was as close as I could get. The reason why I wanted him wearing a white t-shirt is because I did actually manage to find, it wasn't on Grailed, but I found somewhere else, that the original image of the 1992 players with the rings, that was actually on a t-shirt. It looked so good. So what I wanted to do was have one of the players actually wearing the design. I thought that's quite a cool idea for a t-shirt, a bit of t-shirt inception. So you can see all I've done is I managed to find the t-shirt or jumper, can't remember. And then I've just made a square cut and position it where I think it should be placed. It looks okay now, but if we play with the blending mode, which is what I'm doing now, we can make it look even better. But first things first, I need to remove his current logo. So I'm going to use the lasso tool. And then going to make a selection all around the big logo that he has. Cool. Once we're happy with that, we're going to press generative fill. And this time we're just going to type in remove logo and hit generate. So similar to where we expanded the image earlier, now we're giving actual direction to the prompt. We're telling them what we actually want. Annoyingly, the 3 variations it gave me, they weren't as good as when I originally designed this. But that's the beauty or curse of AI. Like, it's going to be different every time. Like I said, if you're not happy, you can press generate and get another 3. Apologies for drinking, but I am British, so gotta have my tea. So once we're happy, as before, go back onto layers, press Control and select both the layers, and then just right click, convert to smart object. Actually, before we do that, let's just duplicate the original one, just in case if I ever need to go back to it for any reason. So now that's one layer, we can bring this t-shirt back. Like I said, it looks okay, but we can do much better just by using the blending modes. So if you click on this drop down, you can scroll through them. And if we go to soft light or hard lights, I think I use hard light. Yeah, that is fine. So it looks much more natural and it blends in with his t-shirt. We just need to remove all the edges. Just going to bump it up a little bit. Just so if he was wearing his t-shirt, that's probably where it would be. Cool. Now we need to add a layer mask to remove the excess around it. So if you click the rectangle with a circle, this will create a layer mask. And make sure we're clicking into the layer mask it's created. Once we've done that, if you press B and select the hard round brush, we're making sure that black is in the foreground. And what we're doing is just removing all the stuff we don't want to see. To refine it further, we can use the soft round brush and reduce the opacity. If you go around the edges, it will just blend it in a lot nicer. It looks a lot more natural. Blending modes are so good, seriously. Absolute lifesaver. You can see the design sits above his necklace, which is what I don't want. So if we now get the hard round brush and increase the opacity to 100%, we can remove some of the ring. I like to do this sort of stuff where possible. It just makes it a lot more realistic. Cool, I'm happy with that. Just reduce the top image opacity to like 90%. Right click, convert to smart object. Let's bring him back into our document. First thing is we need to resize him. So as long as you press Alt, is it Alt? Yeah, Alt, and then drag in the corners, you can rescale it in proportion. There we go. Let's do the big head effect now. So using the lasso tool, we can make a neat cut like around his beard and chin area. And once we've completed that circle, if we press Ctrl J, it will create a duplicate of our selection. And using the same method, if we press Alt and drag the corners, we can make it bigger. What I will say is, when I do these cartoon effects, like the big head ones, I do like to over exaggerate. I mean, if you just do a little bit, it won't have the same effect. So if in doubt, just go big. And then lastly, I'm doing the same for the other 5 players. This video is going to be so long, so I haven't shown the process of me cutting out all of their different heads. And like I said, I don't know any of these players' names. I know people were screaming at me like, either these are really good players or really shit players. I know LeBron James. Cool. Now I'm happy with the positioning. I just need to tidy up his head. Like, as you can see, like underneath his ear, like the neck goes, it overlaps. It just doesn't look realistic. So if we create a layer mask and use a hard round brush, we can just delete this excess. The only thing is we see a bit of Michael Jordan's ear. So once I finish this, I'll just add a layer mask to the original image and remove his ear. Van Gogh style. Cool, I'm happy with that. Before we do the cartoon effect, let's just put a levels adjustment above it. So I've right clicked on the semicircle and selected levels. And I'm dragging out the highlights to really increase them. And slightly adjusting the midtones, making them a bit lighter as well. I'm only doing this because in the examples that we saw earlier, they were really faded and lightly coloured, all the big heads. So let's convert to smart object. And now for what everyone came for, the cartoon effect. So if we press Ctrl J and get a load of duplications, we're going to use a filter gallery. It's really important we make sure that black is in the foreground, white is in the background. And if you go to filter and then click on filter gallery, And the first filter we're going to use is the halftone pattern. And because I've done this before, it's saved all of my filters here. So I've got reticulation, photocopy, etc. Yeah, you want to use the halftone pattern, which is found in the sketch folder. And all it does is it puts the halftones, so the circles in this case, onto the image. So yeah, select the pattern type as dot. And I'm using this size and contrast. We don't want it too big or else it just looks a bit silly. So yeah, go for 2 and 5. Once you're happy, press OK. Next, we're going to adjust the blending mode because it looks a bit too dark. So if you go on the drop down and then go right down to the bottom and select luminosity. So it puts in those half tones, but it's just a bit too dark now. So let's reduce it to about 40%, something like that. Cool. It's really subtle, but it just puts that faded comic cartoon effect dots in. For the next step, we're going to drag an OG layer on top of this one we've just made. And we're going to use the filter gallery again. So if you go filter, filter gallery, and this is my favorite one to use, we're going to use diffuse glow. Which is found in the distort folder. So select diffuse glow, and all it does is, well, it just glows the whole image. You can select how much of the image is glown or blown out. If we adjust the slider, we can just blow out everything. You can see a small glow doesn't do too much. The massive glow just has a white image pretty much. So let's find a happy balance. We just want the highlights to be glowy. Let's go for that. Graininess of 5. Then the clear amount of 18. Press OK. Now go to the blending modes, and we're going to use divide. It looks shit at the moment, but trust me, trust the process. Now we're going to combine the 2 filter layers and an original one. So if we press Control or hold Control, select all 3 layers, go to right click, convert to smart object. Now on the blending mode, let's set this to, I think I use overlay. Yeah. Cool. It's looking good. Let's create a smart object of these 2 now. Next, we're going to drag an OG on top of this one. Again, we're going to go to our filter gallery. And this time we're going to use photocopy, which is found in the sketch folder again. And it gives that cool photocopy effect and just emphasizes their features, like his eyes, his mouth. You can also use stamp as well, like as well as photocopy. But as we're putting a stroke around it afterwards, I didn't feel the need to. So yeah, use these settings. Blend mode of darken or multiply. You can pick your choice really. Now we're going to put another OG on top of these two. Go to filter, filter gallery. And lastly, we're going to use reticulation. You can use film grain as well. But yeah, it gives that grainy, grey effect. This works really well with the next step, which is posterize. So we don't want it too dark or too light. We want to get a happy medium. So go for these settings. Press OK. You guessed it, blend mode. Let's go for screen, but we're going to reduce the opacity. Next step, right click on the semicircle and click posterize. I tend to use 3 or 4 levels. And what it does, it just reduces the number of colors, I guess. And it creates that cartoon poster effect. Let's go with 4. Now we're going to press Control and select all of these new layers. Right click, convert to smart object. Cool. And like I said, the posterize works really well with reticulation. So it's starting to look good. We just need to add a stroke and mess about with the colors a little. So I'm going to add a gradient overlay, but before that, I'll just put a levels adjustment below it. So I press right click levels. It just brings back some of the darkness, but not too much. I'll go to gradient map. Double click in the gradient map. And what this does is if it's over the image, it will just go from left to right. So it will go from the shadows, which we have in black, to the highlights in white. And if we put a color in the middle, it will just work on the midtones. So yeah, here we're putting the midtones as blue. But the colors we want to use, we want to use this reddish, purpley color, which is more towards the shadows. And then towards the highlights, we want this yellowy orange color. Already it's starting to look really good. And gradient maps are so good on faces and people. It's not just for backgrounds or colouring objects. And because each of these, players' heads and players' bodies had different skin tones and contrasts, the gradient map over the top just makes it a bit more cohesive. So we're going to change the blending mode of this gradient map to hue. So as you can see, it's put a really nice reddy yellow colour on, but it's also affected the rings as well, which is what we don't want. We want to bring back the colour of the rings, obviously. So to do this, if you press Control I in the mask, you'll see the mask has gone black. So it's pretty much just poo-poo that mask, like it's not being used. And to bring back the mask, we're going to go into our brush again, having white as the foreground, and we're going to bring back where we want the gradient to be. So we're only selecting the skin tones here. I use this method so much, I do. I mean, you can just make a selection of everyone's skin tone and just have a gradient clip into the skin, people's skin. But I find this a bit quicker. Cool. Now this step, this is like a bit of gold dust, I'd say. So whenever you're using gradient maps, I always like to have an exposure tab below it. So I right clicked on the circle, I press exposure, and I just dragged it up. It's blowing everything out. Now we're going to use the same method as before. If you press Control I, it just removes that mask. Now we're going to select our hard round brush, or soft round brush, sorry. Lower the opacity and just paint in white where we want the exposure to be. It just maximizes every gradient you use. Gives you much more control. And it allows you to set the strength of the gradient. So I like to do this for the highlights, but also the shadows. If we toggle between the exposure tab, you can see the effect it has. So now we're going to do the same, but for the shadows. So right click, exposure, and then drag the top slider the other way. So it darkens the whole image. Press Ctrl I to invert. And same as before, use your brush as a white on foreground and paint in the shadows. If you're not using this method, start doing it. It will elevate your design so much. Once we're happy with that, I've done the exactly same cartoon effect, but to Jason Tatum. Keep trying to say Jason Statham. And what I've done now is I've put Jason Tatum in his own group and the 5 players in their own group. And I've duplicated the group. And on the duplicate, I've just right click, convert to smart object. And I'm hiding my different groups, just in case if I ever need to come back to it, I know where it is. We can use the smart object itself, but it's just the way I like to work. Now we're going to add a stroke. So if you right click on the half circle and press stroke, we're going to add one to the player in the front and then a separate one to the 5 players in the back. So right click, stroke, have it as 6. And you can see, like, I didn't do this before. So in the version on the left, I didn't have a stroke just around him. But I like the way this looked, and I kept it how it is. And there are a few final edits we need to do a bit later on. Like, you can see the blue ring is a lot different colour to the one on the left, but we do that at the end. Next, we need to work on the background. So I'm just going to put the flag of the United States of America with the pole. Again, just using Google. I think I used one off Amazon or somewhere like that. But I wanted one where it's blowing. There we go. The flagpole store. Hopefully I get sponsored. And then same as before, we're going to press save. We're going to upscale it. And we're going to use this same cartoon method as we use for the players. It would look pretty, it would just throw it off if it didn't have the same cartoon effect. So now that's positioned. What I want to do is bring a bit of life and, I guess, funness to the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the flagpole going through the ring. So if you select the lasso tool, and we're selecting the flag layer, and we're just making the selection of where we want the flag to go above. So I press Ctrl J, duplicated it, and dragged this above the layer that features the 5 players. What I noticed was when I added a stroke on his hand, it just looks a bit shanky. So if you add a layer mask, and then have black as your foreground, you can just remove those bits there. Just to neaten it up a bit. This happens when you use the eraser tool to delete parts of an image. It doesn't quite make a solid cut. That's looking better. I'm just going to put all the background elements into their own group, and all the foreground elements into their own group. So let's call this cartoon elements. Let's call this background or flag. What should we do next? Let's go for the text. So press T or the text tool. Type in Olympics, and the font we used is called, I think it's called Bream Catcher. And then to increase the size, if you right click on the T tab and just drag it, it's a lot more intuitive and you have a lot more control if you do it that way. To extend it, if you press Control and then drag it down, it will just make it a lot taller. To add a color, you right click and go color overlay. Let's select this red color. Have it a bit more reddy, a bit more darker. Now we're going to put Paris 2024. think I used a brush tool, or brush font rather. Type in brush script. Again, drag it to the left. Cool. And then to color it, so right click on FX. Actually, let's just bump this down a bit. So yeah, to color it, go to right click, effects, color overlay, and select this blue color. Next, we're going to put USA. Font is going to be, did I use MBA? No, I used I can't say this word, collegiate font. It's important, I think, to make the fonts different. It'll look quite boring, I'd say, if every font was the same, every color was the same. But you need to make sure you're using appropriate fonts as well. So we're going to use a text style. Before we continue, I just really want to show you what I mean by text style. So jumping over to my screen, we can see the GFX World website. This was developed by Fulamo and the guys over at GFX World. And here it contains every design asset that you'll ever need for designing t-shirts, merchandise, posters, anything you can think of. So if we very quickly just look at text styles. So you go down to text effects, and what you can see is it contains individual packs, and each pack has its own theme. So for example, we've got 90s basketball textiles, acid trip, Y2K, heavy metal, bootleg rap, wrestling. I mean, they've got everything that you can imagine. You can buy each individual pack, or you can buy the textiles formula kit, which will contain all of these here. I'm just going to put on my screen now. If you use the code KL Designs, this will get you 20% off your next purchase at GFX World. So to show you what I mean by textiles and how powerful they are, if we look on my screen now, we've got the text bootleg. And if I go into styles, you can see all the ones that I've downloaded. And let's just go into bootleg wrap. Bang. Look how easy that is. This is going to say, if you don't have this already, this will save you so much time. Seriously. Fulamo is one of my favorite designers, if not my favorite designer. And he has spent years perfecting all of the different textiles. So yeah, bootleg wrap. We've got the basketball ones, obviously, that we'll show in a little bit. Wrestling ones. I've used these on official merchandise for wrestlers. Let's just look at some other ones. So I've got some text here saying Rock God. Quickly go to FX, blending options. Let's put some classic rock ones on, shall we? Look at that. And they're super easy to edit as well. Looking at this one, if I want to make the drop shadow a bit smaller, simply just go and drop shadow, decrease the distance. Bang. So easy, so quick. And like I said, use the code KL Designs to get 20% off your next order. Now we've got that textile, we're just going to use our blue for the gradient. Looking good. Now we just need basketball. And then this font, I believe, is Choc, C-H-O-C. And to colour it, we're just going to zoom in a bit. Let's just squash it a little bit. And I want to have it overlapping the players. You'll see why in a bit. Cool. Right click, FX, color overlay. Let's go with the same red as the Olympics text. Add a drop shadow of blue. The same blue as Paris. And then let's put a stroke of white. Not too big. And then you can see in the one on the left that there's a small bit of black in the text. And what I did was I put an inner shadow. So you can play about with the distance, but I had it quite small, so it's a bit subtle. Big that'll do. Next, we're going to add the star elements. Again, this was from Fulamo. So just drag and drop it in. Need to make sure I line it up with the outside. I don't think it doesn't necessarily add too much having these borders, but I just like how it frames everything. So let's edit the color to red. Do the same for the top. Press Ctrl J to duplicate the bottom one. Now, what I'm going to do is just fade away the image. As you can see in the one on the left, it does gradually fade to white. In a moment, it's very cut off. It doesn't look too good. So to do this, we add a gradient overlay. So I've clicked on the 5 players. I press gradient overlay. If you click on gradients, press normal. And then the gradient we want to use is on basics and the one in the middle. As it's a white background, we're having it from white to white for both stoppers. And then play about with the scale. We want it as small as possible. And now we can just manually drag it to where we want it to be. So it's a lot less harsh, and it doesn't, like before, like your eyes just went to that. It didn't look good at all. So let's do the same thing with the flagpole. Add a gradient, have it fade in exactly the same position where the players are. You can see we're pretty much there. There's only a few small tweaks we need to do. Like the ring, for example, in blue. There's a lot more cyan in the one on R1 on the right. And a few other color adjustments we need to do. So what I've done now is I've just grouped all of our 6 players, created a smart object just to isolate it, and then go to filter, camera raw filter, and we're going to select one of the profiles. So if you click on profile and then browse, And then let's use one of the vintage ones. And I don't know why, but it's always an even number that I use for the vintage profiles. I think I use 6 or 4 maybe. Cool, so I went for 6, press OK. You can see it's softened all of the colours much better. And we're nearly there with that blue ring. But we can decrease the cyan further. If you right click, press selective colour, select the cyan. And with the slider, let's just reduce this. You can see straight away it's taken all the cyan out and softened it quite nicely. And I tried to bring back some of the blue, but I just couldn't get it. So I used another method as well as selective colour. I mean, it's good, but it's just a bit too faded now. I want it a lot more like the blue that we've already got there for Paris and in the USA flag. So the method I use, right-clicked on the half circle, go to hue, saturation, and just move it a bit more to the blue. You can see it has made it a lot more blue. It's affected the holographic, which we don't want. So if you press Control I to invert it and just, again, poo-poo it, and we're going to paint in the Olympic ring where we want the more blue hue and saturation to be. So use a soft round brush, have the foreground on white, and let's just paint this back in. There we go, that's a lot closer. I'm happy with that. Right, let's combine everything now. So all of our active folders in our composition, I press Control to select them all, press Command G or Control G to create its own group, label this our complete composition, press Control J to duplicate this group now, hide the OG one, and let's merge the group and then make it a smart object. We're nearly there, guys. So now we've got all of our composition onto one layer. I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and we're going to go into Profiles again, and we're going to use Vintage. And again, I bet I used one of the even ones. I forgot now. Yeah, this 4 one's pretty good. Let's just reduce the effect of it though. I don't want it to be too faded. It's really subtle, but it makes all the difference. Then next, right click on the half circle, go to color balance. And for the midtones, I just want to put a bit more red in there, a bit more yellow as well. Similar to our gradient map, for the players. I'm just going to subtly do it for the overall composition. Just to make it a bit more similar to what we had on the left. Now go to right click on the half circle, go to hue saturation again. And I liked how the blue worked, so I increased the blue a little bit, decrease the saturation. Let's also play with the vibrance. So let's reduce this a bit. Not too much. And then bump up the saturation a little bit. I like how that looks. It's a bit more faded than our original one, but I'm happy with that. Let's add a gradient map over everything. We're just going to do a simple black to white, but play with the blending mode. If I use lighten or screen, one of those. And let's way reduce the opacity of this. Again, all these tweaks are really subtle, but it just helps with the overall composition. So now we finished, we just group everything. Put its own group, right click, merge group, and make it a smart object. And we're going to mock this up. So let's copy that. And the t-shirt I'm using is one from Duron. These are the mock-ups I use for when I do my official work for clients. Cool, so I'm happy with how it looks. I'm making a smart object of this, and I'm just going to display it how I do for social media. So I go File, New, and the dimensions I use are here. But the resolution is 72, that's important. This is how I show everything on my Instagram. It's always on a t-shirt. If you didn't know, that's how I do it. So there we go, that's how it looks. That's exactly how it looks on social media. And there's perfect dimensions if you want to share it to yours. Use this going forward. Thank you guys for watching. I know that was a long video and there's a lot of stuff we needed to cover. If you have any questions, please shoot them in the comments. If you want to reach me a bit quicker, do follow my Instagram, which is @KLDesigns. And if you manage to use this video and you find it effective, please show me what you guys create. If you do the hashtag KLDesigns, I'd love to repost what you guys cook up. And lastly, this is my only YouTube video so far, but if you'd like to see more, please do follow me and subscribe.